more than happy. That's been my view.
Councillor Sanders has been round the courses long before your eyes.
I mean, seriously, despite the fact that it was a bit of a...
We've been drafting council amendments in North London since 1982.
Indeed, but actually the point is a serious one, and I would like you to go for it, because, you know, seriously, we see the impact of it within the group.
Seriously, it is agreed.
The point is that actually it's the lead member of the planning.
Well, that's why I said I referred it to
It will
Cabinet.
go to the cabinet meeting next week.
Right.
Now, can we welcome the parking team, everyone's favourite team? And can we welcome the ever popular cabinet member? Particularly, he does something in the Garden Suburb Ward next week.
The discussion on contract monitoring. Should there be someone here from the NSL to answer questions? Can we also thank our two housing?
Can I thank you for coming? And I hope you enjoyed it. I think
Would I have expected should I have expected someone from NSL here to answer questions about the way that they operate?
I think that Lynn will do a wonderful job, and the cabinet member will do an equally wonderful job, as will Mr. Brown.
It does set the tone for the committee, though.
It does, absolutely.
John, I have utmost confidence in all three of them. It does beg the question as to whether or not I should have expected or would have expected someone from NSL to be here.
It
To
might
answer
be.
questions as well.
And through you, sure it sets a precedent.
Well, it's
It doesn't set a precedent.
they certainly next time they will be expected to appear and tell us how well they're performing.
I'm sure that will be arranged.
Lynn, would you like to speak to your report?
Thank you, Chairman. This report for you shows first year's performance of NSL as the provider of this contract. It looks at some issues that they found challenging and some opportunities as well during the first part of that contract. There are some challenges that we posed them operationally around town centre changes and around Sampson's in that set of time, and also in terms of their movement from Barnet to NSL. There were some contractual two key issues on the beginning and the commencement of that contract, particularly around the back office, that caused them specific challenges in the first 6 months. I'm pleased to say that in the last 6 months their performance has improved, and you can see that consistently through the KPIs performance that we've been monitoring. It might be helpful if I explain there are different parameters within the contract itself. So there are certain, there's a certain ramping up within the contract around in the first year, so in the first 3 to 12 months, the key performance indicators that are measured, and then obviously in 13 to 25 and 26 months onwards, which can be shown in point 9.3, which shows how the contract itself looks at the KPIs and then ramps up and looks at continuing NSL's performance through the contract itself. Thought it was helpful if we gave some context around parking and the parking service. So NSL obviously are responsible for enforcement of the parking contract, and we've tried to highlight that to the committee and table that's included at the 9-10. Obviously the parking client team come under responsibility, so we manage the NSL contract. But there are still other relationships with DRA new contract going forward. And obviously within NSL as well, they are responsible for permits and vouchers and actually the call centre. So parking, the way that parking happens within Barnet in terms of the different elements of it is quite complex. So thought it would be helpful for the committee having awareness of how that works. I think we've seen certainly within this year of contracts a reflection of higher levels of driver compliance. So obviously the aim and incorporating that this contract fulfills is ensuring that Barnet itself has improved traffic flow and actually removes congestion. So that's the aim of the contract. And certainly we've seen that our paid-for parking areas have improved and our PCN issue has reduced. But actually that's a factor across all of other London authorities. So if you like comparing ourselves with them. And my final comment is regarding table 911, which at the time of the call was prepared, and they are provision figures. So within the Cabinet and CLC reports later this week, those figures will change. So the provision figures, we are expecting them to change. I hope Chairman, I've covered most things. Happy to take any questions from the members.
Thank you very much. You've covered lots of issues, and I see lots of colleagues want to ask a question. However, in your report there was one figure which I had some difficulty in reconciling with my experience, which is that you only get 150 complaints relating to parking service each year.
You meant each day.
Which is only 3 a week.
They've got substantially lower. Where's that figure?
It is on page 13. I just couldn't believe it, I'm afraid. There are quite a few Council Harbour will confirm.
I suspect it's the definition of complaint. If someone getting a ticket and they didn't want one, didn't expect one, it's not regarded as a complaint.
Anyway, whilst you're looking up that, who would like to kick off? Councillor Cook and then Councillor Harper. Then Councillor Turner.
Well, firstly, was there a failure of due diligence by NSL in not understanding what they were taking on board? Because I see under 953, no Barnet back office staff transferred into the back office of NSL, which created unexpected pressures immediately put up the transfer. Why is that unexpected?
No one wanted to get working worthy.
Through you, Chairman.
Councillor Sullivan, you have your chance to speak.
Through you, Chairman. So part of the NSL offer was a subcontracting out the back office of the service, and that the aspect of service was based in Croydon. So obviously a number of Barnet employees didn't want to transfer and didn't want to make that journey. The Croydon base obviously had back office employees, which NSL have and obviously fulfil their requirements on other contracts, other non-model contracts. So the transfer occurred and they managed that through their back office, but obviously not as well as having some knowledge and some information around what the back office processes were. It didn't go, there wasn't a complete audit, but there obviously was their existing practices, because NSL obviously have lots of other local issue contracts.
So are you saying that built into the business case that NSL assumed when they bid for the contract, they thought they were getting a number of Barnet staff with expertise about how things are done in Barnet and possibly around the geography of Barnet, and that didn't happen? Is that the point you're making?
So I will ask Paul Bragg to give some additional advice. Paul Bragg managed the change, but obviously throughout the contract award, Barnet will have been having conversations and negotiations with NSL about how staff will fit in and how the contract was going to be handed over. But I'll ask Mr. Brown to answer some specifically.
Thank you. I think it's fair to say that NSL didn't expect everyone to transfer over to them because it's a long way for staff to travel to Croydon. They also subcontracted some of the process away from Croydon to Bristol, I think it was. So again, there was not very much chance that people would transfer there. That side of it they covered off because they realised that there was no chance of people going to Bristol, so they already had the staff at the Bristol base ready to operate. At Croydon, I think it's fair to say that they did expect some personnel to transfer and to therefore gain from that expertise. Unfortunately, they ended up in a situation where nobody transferred at all, and that was unexpected on their part. Yeah, it's a fair point, but maybe they should have had something in place that would have dealt with that had that occurred, as it did. However, there is quite a big resource that works in the back office. There is a requirement for those people to fully appreciate what's required in terms of statutory functions, and there is quite a long training program necessary for employing new staff. So that's one of the reasons why they had difficulty at the beginning, because they did have to go through employing new staff and training them, and they didn't necessarily have the right level of resource that they needed from day one to do everything.
I can only hope that the same issues don't apply to the other life Bugle contracts which are in the offing. If we can move to KPI 2, which is on page 11 of my report. It says that KPI 2 is measured in part about activity levels, which includes PCNs issued. And as I understand it, the commercial payments which are payable, made to NSL, depend on the performance of KPI 2 and others. And so, on the face of it, it seems to me that NSL has an incentive to issue a minimum number of PCNs. And we've been told as councillors consistently that that's not the case. So, can some light be shed on this matter?
There's certainly no targets within the contract in regard to PCN numbers. In the submission that was provided by all bidders, and it's obviously being the preferred bidder, they identified the resources that they felt were necessary to be deployed in order to cater for all the restrictions we have in the borough. And they identified from their experience what they would expect, and they also did some surveys of the borough to look at compliance levels at the point they were bidding. And from that they came up with a plan as to the level of non-compliance they would expect, and therefore the number of PCNs they would like to issue. So that set out within the plan what the expectation was, and that did give a number of PCNs. But we do not use that number in terms of monitoring to say you haven't achieved that number, therefore you're failing in terms of this KPI. What we do is look at whether or not they are deploying that resource that they've suggested, or be looking out for non-compliance and therefore potentially issuing the PCNs to make sure they are effectively deployed and doing what is intended in the other aspects of the plan.
Chair, I don't fully understand that, to be honest. If the payments to NSL depend upon how well they do on the KPIs, and if KPI 2 includes activity levels, which in turn includes the number of PCNs, how come NSL doesn't have any commercial incentive to issue a minimum number of PCNs? It just seems like logic, I'm sorry.
Effectiveness doesn't mean a number of PCNs. Effectiveness means are they enforcing when there is a requirement to enforce.
But on the face of it, the the company that we've outsourced to has a commercial incentive to give our residents as many PCNs as they can in order to maximise their income from Barnet council taxpayers. Is that not a correct analysis of the situation?
No, I'll say it is because the payment we make to NSL is not affected by the number of PCNs they issue. So if they, in their plan, they identified a number of PCNs they were expecting potentially to issue with the level of resources they were going to deploy. However, if they were to increase on that, say by 20%, they have nothing to gain on that at all. So there's no reason for them to go out there and try and target a number.
If they were to issue a large number of PCNs against which successful appeals were then made, then that would count against them.
It certainly would, and that's one of the areas that would be monitored by the monitoring team, that if they are issuing PCNs willy-nilly just because they want to get the numbers up as high as possible, we would certainly expect there to be a high level of challenges, and we would certainly expect to see them having difficulty in defending that and therefore having to cancel PCNs. So there is another KPI that looks at the number of PCNs that are cancelled, and we also look at the number of the outcome of cases that go to the Practice Appeal Service, and if we were to see a large number being cancelled on the basis that they're not issued correctly, and that would be cause for concern and dealt with it elsewhere in the contract.
Could we receive the detail of how KPI 2 is determined, because it's rather vague in the reports and several bullet points. It doesn't describe exactly how it's done.
If we could have that detail, and then we know that we promise that we can move on.
I have another point.
Oh, sorry, you have been rather dominating. So can you try to
It's not doing your job as a council.
It really is.
KPI 12 relates to maintenance of lines and sites. Now, the report suggests that this is an NSL responsibility. I've heard it said by a senior officer that it's a Barnet Council responsibility, and I wonder if we could have clarity around that, because whoever is responsible is frankly not doing the job.
The contract requires for NSL to report all cases where they feel that either the lines or the signs are not compliant and therefore will affect their effectiveness of issuing tickets if they identify non-compliance. So the onus is on them to, as they're out and about, so all of the CEOs, there's 38 of them in a borough on Friday, as part of their duties, anything they identify incorrectly in terms of signs and lines needs to be reported. We then, as a monitoring team, will decide what to do with that. One option would be to ask themselves to do the corrective work. However, we've not gone out down that route so far because the price they want to charge for it is more expensive than other alternatives we have through other high-rise maintenance contracts. So thus far, we have actually gone for the cheapest option, but we would like to discuss that further with NSL, because ideally we'd like the onus on them to identify the defects and rectify them, but only if it's going to be cost effective for the council.
So how come we've got a KPI which talks about effecting the necessary repair? If this is separate project work which is done on request, and if there's commercial agreements how to do it?
I think it's related to the fact that if they're not identifying and reporting, then we won't end up with an effective repair, and you could have an impact on the operation.
Yeah, I'm not disputing the reporting bit, it's the affecting bit that I'm querying.
KPI 12 doesn't come actually into force within the contract until month 26 onwards. So my understanding is that the ability there to carry out Paul's actions as is described will enable us to have that conversation, that dialogue with them before that time, and then either within the contract we'll exercise that role, or actually we'll choose not to because we can then get a cheaper price from somewhere else. But in order to be able to exercise that role, we need to have it within the contract.
So a president of Barnet Council that's not maintaining the lines, is that correct?
Which line, if you point out any lines with, as a board member that you've got concerns about, then please let officers know.
Well, I have let officers know. I've been involved with several cases where PCNs have been challenged and rescinded because the lines were so faint that the residents could not reasonably be expected to have acted upon them. And months later, the lines have not been
Councillor Cook, I don't think we need to do your ward work tonight, but you could send emails to Councillor Cohen,
Absolutely.
Councillor Panwolf, or you could put questions down for the next council meeting, but I don't think we want to do that.
I have, and
Can we now move on?
that's no good came of it.
Councillor Hunt.
Chairman, if I may, I can clarify that because we're well aware that there are quite a lot of issues arising on a day-to-day basis, and there is a timescale in terms of the way we're doing it at the moment to get that through to our external contractor. What we've actually instigated with NSL is for them to do a borough-wide survey of all of the signs and lines and to identify exactly in one hit all of the issues that are currently out there with attention, so that we can issue that to our external contractor to do it as a one-off operation. Now, that will be subject to how many defects are out there and how much budget we have to deal with that. But my expectation at the moment is that we will be able to handle it within this year's budget allocation.
Thank you. Now, can we move on, Councillor Hunt?
Thank you very much, Chairman. The first comment is that this really hasn't been a very happy year, has it? It's been a challenging one, a very difficult one. I recognise that things are getting better. I don't doubt that that is in part due to the rigorous scrutiny that Councillor Dean Cohen has brought to this matter since he took on the portfolio. But I recall Councillor Cohen's predecessor when he was persuading Cabinet that we should place this contract, explaining that this was a service that wasn't fit for purpose and therefore needed to go outside the council. And I just wonder whether it was indeed so unfit for service that NSL have spent the first year trying to put things right and restructure it and not actually able to focus sufficiently on getting on with the job that they're supposed to be doing. Maybe they're now coming out of this, but I wonder if Councillor Cohen shares my view of this.
Well, I took over this role soon after, or straight after NSL's contract commenced on the 1st of May, and I took on this role a couple of weeks later. And since then, I've been working with officers to really press NSL to perform as I want them to perform. And it has been a slog, and we are starting to see the light, and that we are on target. Regarding previous issues within the thing, I can't obviously say what the situation was internally because I wasn't in that position to see what was happening there. But maybe officers have comments on how it was working internally previously.
No. But perhaps I can make a second point.
Perhaps they don't want to.
No, well, I can understand perhaps. Right. On page 7 of the report, I have to say, my eye was struck by 9.10, pointing out that NSL, of course, is one part of the system being deployed by Barnet. The cohesive interface with all other activities is vital, it goes on to say. And then it lays out the split of responsibilities. Well, I agree about the cohesive interface. So does this split that we have actually make sense? how are we going to achieve a cohesive interface? What are the risks that are resulting from having this mix of different activities which, officers are trying to hold together? But it seems to me that that is also part of the challenge. You've set it out for us here. So, how challenging is that? How are you going to get around that? Can this be pulled together properly so that this mix that we have in council at the moment is not holding back progress?
Thank you. It does make it very challenging, Councillor, it does make it very complex. And certainly, obviously as parking has become part of my portfolio and my workload from just literally from the 1st of April this year, my view will be to have a look into, once the NSCSO and DRS contracts are up and running, and actually do a review, if you like, root and branch from beginning to end, the customer journey, just to see how effective and how those elements work together. But obviously NSL will probably be into our 2nd or maybe even our 3rd year of contract by that time. And then hopefully we will be looking to see whether the contract was being performing and to look at what alternatives we would have to procure at that time. And that would be an opportunity then to see whether these various aspects work. It is going to be really challenging to get that mix and that consistency and clear approach throughout, particularly for the customer's journey.
Well, Chairman, I'd like to urge that go forward as swiftly as possible. I think that should be a recommendation to the Cabinet Member and indeed to the lead Commissioner, whose job presumably is to ask Ms Bishop to get on and do precisely this kind of thing. But again, this says the management of parking and its reputation in Barnet is significantly dependent on all these different bits working together. And I think we must remember at the end of the day that it's not actually the reputation of these different service providers, it's the reputation of Barnet Council that's on the line and that we should be concerned about.
Councillor Turner.
I just had a couple of points on the NSL at item 6, 6.2 specifically, when talking about the NSL budgetary overspend in the contract during the year. Several reasons for this variant, which is described in the report, would include overtime, appeals, and Saracens CPZ. In respect of I've got just questions about the overtime and the appeals, really. The appeals, it says that there were some, here we are, PCN being cancelled following appeals cost £44,000. Surely PCNs are only successfully appealed if they're issued wrongly. Surely we don't budget for issuing tickets wrongly, so I don't understand why successful appeals will come out of the scope of the budget. And the second point being that with regards to overtime, it does say NSL kids overtime to ensure that the overall hours of enforcement were met. I would have thought, in order to ensure that enforcement occurred throughout the hours of the current parking restrictions, I would have thought that would have been part of the job. That would have been line 1 of the contract, enforce parking during parking restriction times. So I didn't understand either why it was necessary to pay overtime. Because the overspend is something like 10% there, isn't it? It's relatively high.
Chairman, if I may, I'll take the overtime question and Paul will answer the appeals question. The overtime particularly was also part of the transition when we transferred some of the staff over. The complement of CEOs wasn't at full complement. So there was a process of NSL to go through to actually recruit and then actually train those CEOs. So in order to ensure that...
CEOs means Chief Executive Officers, mate. A lot of
civil enforcement officers, I think somebody somewhere has a strange sense of humour. So there was a process by which NSL were actually recruiting and training to make sure that their staff on street were, you know, significantly trained and could deliver the service that Barnet require. And during that time, in order to keep the profile and the rotas, we worked with them to seek them to perform those duties within overtime.
And we picked up the bill.
It's a combination of them using their existing staff who are skilled at doing that, and obviously the effectiveness of them on the street in terms of the PCNs that they issue within the enforcement regime that we have about them being effective, and obviously dealing with parking issues. So in terms of the contract, even if they're working overtime hours, that still manage us to fulfil the contract, or NSL to fulfil the contract.
I think I would be satisfied if Councillor Cohen gave me his utmost assurance that these agreements are rigorously enforced from our side, and that we always get a fair deal out of our agreement with these commercial entities.
I can give the member that assurance.
Thank you.
Mr. Bragg?
In respect to the appeals, we do need some clarification on this point, because the £44,000 additional cost is actually in relation to the level of cases going to appeal. So to give an example, in the last year of the in-house service, there were 951 cases that went to appeal. Since NSL taken over the service, that's gone up to 1,893. So that big increase in the number of appeals cost the council £46 for each appeal, which that additional number equates to the £44,000.
So it's actually the way it's drafted is slightly wrong.
Yeah.
It's not the case that PCNs being cancelled cost the authority £44,000.
It's not to do with cancellation, it's to do with
the administrative process of managing the appeals costs £44,000.
That's correct. And the reason for the increase in the number of appeals is, we believe, not down to the way NSL are operating, but there are so many websites that have appeared which are assisting people to appeal, including giving them a lot of free information, template letters, to make it very, very easy for people to appeal, and making people more aware that actually it doesn't cost you anything to appeal, so you might as well. So that's the reason why the number of appeals has gone up, not because of the way in which the service is being operated.
Anecdotally, I'll just ask them, following up, just tentative now, is it in your experience, does the proliferation of that sort of template letter, or whatever you call it, of online advice, actually increase the number of successful appeals, or does it just increase the amount of admin we have to do to back them off?
I think it certainly has increased the number of successful appeals, clearly on the basis that people are being told it's not going to cost you anything, you have a possibility that you may win, so you might as well try it. So the more that go, the more that potentially could be successful. The other thing that doesn't particularly help the authority is that the way the appeal hearing is heard is that there's the onus on the authority to prove. If the judge, for want of a better word, believes what the appellant is saying, then he may be minded to go with that without them actually providing evidence. So there's a chance it could go against us, even if we are providing a good argument.
Thank you.
Councillor Moore, then Councillor Sandwich.
Thank you very much. I've got two questions, points and a reflection. The first point is centred around 9.7 in the report, and that's and it picks up some of the issues that were mentioned around PCNs and overtime. In Barnet, you're looking at something like 2 PCNs per hour per CEO, and your paper is very clear that the average is between 1.4 and 1.7 per hour. Is it because we are a larger borough that you've got the elevated rate, or is that linked in with this overtime rate? And I say that because anecdotally, I know of cases where people have been given PCNs at 9 o'clock at night on a site that's not in a town centre, is not on a road where there's clearly a safety issue. And actually, I have some concerns about that and that balance. So do you think that the 2 PCNs per hour per operator is actually elevated, and is that linked in with the overtime? And I'll raise the second one separately.
We're actually finding, if we look at the figures in terms of what we consider to be the normal hours without overtime, so as per the plan, that the issue rate is actually no different to the issue rate with the overtime. When they first started doing the overtime, and therefore there was more enforcement going on later at night when people perhaps had in the past sort of waived it because there wasn't too many CEOs around, then yes, we did see a bit of a spike at that point. But when people suddenly realised that we were enforcing at those sorts of hours, then it dropped off. So now we're seeing it pretty even between whether or not it's standard hours or whether or not it's overtime hours. Issue rates about the same and that too. It fluctuates just under and just over, depending on the time of year.
It's just the fact that we're an outlier in terms of the numbers, and you know, perhaps it would be worth looking at Croydon's figures and a bit of comparison, given that they're physically the same size. I would be interested to know whether Croydon's figures came out at a similar level. Second point I wanted to raise really picks up around the issues around signs and lines and how robust the process is. And in drawing on that, I draw the delegated powers report that's come out that is looking at, if I understand the figures correctly, writing off or deleting in excess of £4 million worth of PCNs in the 2011-12 year. And so the question I want to know is that going to persist into 12-13, where clearly there'll be an element of the NSL impact? Is it an issue around signs and lines and the problems that we have persisting with those not being clear? And how is that going to impact on the business case around NSL's business case, or indeed around the council's vulnerability financially around that? Because I don't know how regular that write-off is. I just don't get a sense of that at all.
Chairman, the debt write-off, which is a separate DPR, I think is referred to in Cabinet or CRC meeting later this week, is a write-off between 2009 and 2013. So no, it's not reflective of this particular year, and no, there hasn't been an annual write-off, which is where I would be taking the PCN issue. It's looking back at where we've been and actually taking collectively 2009, 2018, so a number of years, and then looking at the various PCNs that are outstanding and going through a process of where they are and what point they stopped, and some of them will be as a result of successful appeals, and at that point debt would have been deleted and cancelled, and then obviously there's other debt that cannot be traced because the debtor has moved on, and then within the report itself there's a number of categories that it details.
So what's your projection for 12, 13 and onwards in terms of the sorts of write-offs you might be having to make? And does that have a financial impact both for the council going forward and NSL's contract?
So as part of the calculation that we do within the accounts, we reconcile this year and then we move forward to sort of reconcile 12-13 and move forward to 13-14. We take account of that. So I'm sorry, my recollection isn't, I don't have a copy of the report with me, and sadly the report refers to continuing live debt. It has like a grey column. Unfortunately, I don't have a figure in my head.
I do some homework sometimes.
So within the report, that figure is quoted at 5.8 million. So that's the level of live debt we have going forward. But in terms of the accounts, there's a provision of around about 400,000 that we've carried forward from last year through to this year in terms of debt provision.
And would we presume that as signs and lines and a range of other things that were part of the discussion we had last year talking about the NSL contract and resolving those issues, irrespective of whose responsibility it is, would we be looking to resolve that and reduce the amount of live debt and the write-offs in subsequent years?
I can answer part of that. I think we're in danger of confusing the difference between signs and lines problems and then cancelling a PCM because it was technically incorrectly raised in the first place because signs and lines were not clear enough against PCMs that have been issued but have never been paid for whatever reason, but we wouldn't necessarily know why because those people just haven't come forward to pay. So, it's true to say that some PCMs might be related to people not paying because of signs and lines, but generally the debts are not related to that. The other thing that's worth saying as well in connection with this is that there is a KPI in the contract which identifies a maximum cancellation rate of 7%. If you go beyond that, then effectively NSL fail their KPI. Now they may use the fact that signs and lines are non-compliant as mitigation, but there is that responsibility on them to identify those issues. And technically we would fail if they've identified them correctly and we haven't corrected them. So that, there is a process.
Yeah, absolutely.
that
This
comes
is,
together.
this is what I'm trying to cano, because there's clearly a set of issues on both sides here.
I think, through you, Chairman, in previous years, the problem is that at the end of the year, the PCNs that were issued and notices sent out, they were never actually cleared up at the end of any financial year. And it's only now that the system is being cleaned up and moving forward, so year on year, these PCMs are either cancelled if that is what is determined or they're paid.
So the reality is it's been a chronic problem within the parking service.
I think we can all remember what Councillor Harper said a few minutes ago.
Indeed.
Have you finished, Alison?
Yeah, I was just going to reflect, if we can't get this right, what hope do we have with DRS and NSCSO?
Okay.
That's
Maybe
slightly
we'll reflect. Councillor Salinger.
Thank you. Councillor Harper was talking about reputation. Within this council, clearly the reputation of the council is governed by a number of factors. It can be schools, it can be parks. One of the key ones, the quality of refuse collection. One of the key factors for a lot of residents, and the point where they become completely, I was going to say pissed off, but I'll tend to my language, upset by the council, is when they get parking tickets which they don't feel are justified. And that spreads, and they spread it to their neighbours.
Do you ever feel that a parking ticket is justified?
Sometimes when one gets a parking ticket, you know you've been a complete brat and you shouldn't have been parking there. And indeed, what Lynn said at the beginning, that this is all about improving traffic flow and parking compliance. In an ideal world, we would not issue any parking tickets at all, and we shouldn't rely on the income from them. So that's a different issue. There are a number of issues raised in the report. Some of them have been covered. The questions of signs and lines, I'll follow up somewhere else because I don't think that I'm quite clear on exactly who's responsible. The question of outstanding tickets, we have today the technology that as our enforcement officers are issuing tickets, they ought to be able to tell when they put in the car registration number if there are large numbers or significant numbers of outstanding and unpaid parking tickets for that vehicle. And that is the opportunity then to take different action against that car, if that were the case. It may not be there at the present, but certainly there's no reason why it shouldn't be there, because if the DVLA can keep that sort of stuff, certainly our parking enforcement ought to be able to know that this car that we're issuing the 20th ticket to in the last year and the previous 19 haven't been paid. then to alert someone else in the council, that car is there now and we need to get to that driver very quickly and actually talk to him about why he hasn't paid those tickets and to make clear what action we're going to take, or even to have powers possibly somewhere else if we had them to clamp that vehicle until all the parking tickets are paid. Can I move on from that? There are, and we say there are no incentives in this for the company in terms of issuing tickets, and I accept that. But they've also got a responsibility for dealing with abandoned cars. There's nothing to stop them actually going and abandoning cars equally in the borough, so that they've got abandoned cars to deal with. And I would hope that they wouldn't do that in the same way as they would. Can I also say, I've detected, and I've had complaints from people since they took over this contract, that there's a little white van that will be running around shortly around this borough, around particular locations where they know, and Councillor Moore talked about places where you don't expect to get a ticket. And I've asked for a review and been told we haven't got the resources to do it. Where we have, for example, single yellow lines that operate from 8 in the morning till 11 o'clock at night. If you had a single yellow line operating for those hours, it ought to be a double yellow line. And the signs for it, up on high walls, and they're not obvious, and people get tickets there. There are a number of places, particularly that have come to me, and this isn't a question of doing more work, there's a number of them are outside my ward, of redundant crossings, lowered pavements, which are no longer relevant. And yet they'll go round and inspect all of those at odd hours, and people will have parked across them. And people who are just 12 inches over the edge of one of these places and they get a ticket, in a way that years ago they would not have got a ticket. And I think somewhere within the people doing the enforcement teams now, they've got a list of all these and they go around them late at night and issue tickets to them. And that is the sort of thing which does our reputation no good at all. Now, can I also, just two other things. One is, how long does it take for appeals to be heard? And there's reference in here to the timing of correspondence. And this is without the specific case, and I'll take up. I've had complaints of people who've waited 4 months for a reply to a letter and to an appeal, and they're left not knowing what's happening. And that's, again, part of the reputation. What is the expectation of officers in terms of time for getting replies to those? And can I then go on to the question of excluded roads? There is a list that's held centrally of roads where we have agreed not to enforce pavement parking. Can that list now be published? Everyone knows it exists. Is there any reason why it shouldn't be published?
Or should? You want it should not be seen,
Councillor, Mr Braggs going to take you on first your appeals question.
Okay, I don't think you're talking about the process appeal. You're talking about when the PCM is challenged by members of the public. Okay, the response that we would expect is 28 days. We accept that that hasn't always happened, and there have been occasions where in the early part of the contract that was one of the failures in the back office because of the volumes. And bear in mind that they did take over a certain volume from us at the point that they took over the service on day one. They didn't necessarily anticipate the volume that they got. That was one issue for them. And as I say, they didn't have the level of resource that they had expected because of the fact that they were transferred from Barnet. So yes, they did struggle at the beginning, and they did certainly struggle to respond within the time. but that has now been sorted out and they are responding on time. So that's an area in terms of back office processing KPI they are now performing on, but well into the early days.
So excluded roads, councillor. I'm sorry, I'm not aware. I know that obviously there's a process we go through for when residents complain about pavement parking, and certainly that's the instigator of us taking action. And certainly we provide warning notices first, and then issue PCNs after. So I can have a look and we can review where we are with an excluded roads list, but I'm not aware of that currently.
Can I just interrupt and ask a question that I've not asked very many? Before you do anything, you do actually consult with all councillors, don't you?
Yes.
Yes, Chairman. I believe that there's a process that when a resident highlights that there's an issue with pavement parking, we go through a process which then consults with the ward councillors to take a view on whether they feel that it's an issue, particularly for that street in their ward.
And I don't know that the wards in the suburb which are excluded would actually like the world to know that they're excluded, because people then don't park in them.
It seems like there would be a rush on there.
Sorry, Chairman, you're misunderstanding. This isn't a question of not parking, it's a question of people parking on the pavement. And getting tickets and parking on the pavement.
I'm well aware of what the problem is, but if you advertise that they can park on the pavement, they might well jolly well go and do so.
They do anyhow. It's just a question of getting a list so that members actually know which roads have been granted that exemption. Now, some of them have been done formally with signs and lines, and there are a whole host of others which are done informally, and it's that list of the informal ones.
The roads you ask about is ones you are allowed to park on the pavement and it's not enforced.
Yes.
Well, again, there's no specific roads which are enforced on pavements as such, unless it's requested by a resident or ward member to enforce.
Sorry, I was with a traffic.
Brian, I think we're actually going slightly further than the actual contractual performance. So can we go on to...
Is there another sort of technology question?
Again, I think, can we have a quick answer on technology, then go to Councillor Snyder?
Can I just take the question you asked about crossovers as well?
Yes.
NSL should not be enforcing parking across crossovers unless the resident, the owner of the property, requests it. We are aware they have done so without that request being made, and that has been raised with them to make sure they don't do that.
Just also add that if someone is parked across the crossover of a communal nature, that can be enforced without the permission of the operator of that communal facility.
And technology?
Sorry, Chairman, you mean actually pulling off the data and having more information. So within the report, Councillor, they're actually in year 2 of the NSL contract, they're required to improve the software that obviously this information is contained on, and they are in the process of procuring a new piece of IT system that will enable us to be able to interrogate the data much more freely and better than we have the ability to do currently.
Can we be sure then that this new software will enable the enforcement officers to know when they're issuing a ticket how many outstanding tickets there are against a particular vehicle?
Well, I mean, that may have been good in the past, but as I say, now we are on top of things, and those tickets that are outstanding will be pursued after in the correct format, as opposed to letting them lie for 3 years.
Councillor Snyder.
Thank you, Chairman.
I've got a sort of general question around KPIs and then some specific on the KPIs. I think it has been, I think it is a disappointing performance over the first year, because what was meant to save about £250,000 has ended up costing about £250,000 extra. But from the report we've got, obviously it's not in the format that we were looking at earlier in the meeting for future meetings. So what we don't actually have is any of the detail on the KPIs. We have what the KPI summary is, but we don't actually have, all we have is some brief comments. We don't actually have any performance data against that KPI. So therefore, it's difficult to actually make a judgment about how they have performed. I know paragraph 9.5 says it's adequate rather than good. I mean, I think, £250,000 overspend as opposed to saving us £250,000, I would probably say it is bad rather than adequate. But can we, in the future, actually get some detail on the KPI so we can actually be in a position to judge performance? On turning to
Could you give a yes or no answer, please?
So, yes, Councillor, yes, Chairman, this is obviously the first report. It coincides with, at the same time with which the templates were being prepared. So we've, if you like, we've done the best with the information we have currently. Happy to try and drill down into more of that detail. If Chairman, if I may just clarify, although the 6.2 shows that there was an overspend in terms of NSL contract costs, I just wanted to point and direct people to paragraph 6.4, which talks about the actual achievement. And obviously it's provisional at this moment in time, subject to CLC and Cabinet, but actually there was an achievement of income and actually an overachievement of 86,000, so not a huge amount, but actually the account holistically, when you look at both the income and costs, did actually achieve the income required, and that will be reported to CLC and Cabinet this week.
We do have one other item, so can you be very brief, please?
Well, I just, I'll roll up. On the KPIs, what I'm not clear is actually what deductions or performance payments have actually been made. Because it's a mixed picture if you look across the KPIs that are actually in force at the moment. So I just wonder, across the whole piece, what has actually been the balance between performance payments being made and penalties being enforced? And if I just go on to a couple of the KPIs, various members have talked earlier about the incentive to actually issue more tickets, which I think is actually the case when you see the number of wardens hanging around in car parks, which obviously is not actually enforcing traffic flow. You know, if you've got 3 or 4 wardens in a car park, it's clearly the incentive.
Enforcing the turn of the car.
KPI 10, which is talking about bus penalty uncharged notices. One of the sections there says, if the service provider determines that compliance has resulted in a decrease in incident capture and therefore resulting in PCNs, this must be flagged at monthly meetings so the conversion rate can be adjusted, or the council may seek to relocate the relevant camera. So it seems to be implying, oh, we're not catching enough people, let's move the camera. Similarly, in KPI 11 talks about service provider will maintain the weekly collection rate in line with budget expectations. Surely, is that not an incentive to actually issue tickets rather than just meet some of the KPIs, which are about the hours worked? And can I just ask what actually are the hours that CEOs work? Thank you.
Lynn?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to unfortunately defer to Mr. Bragg and try and help him with those. So the first one was about performance and penalties. So what performance payments have been made and what penalties have been deducted.
Okay. No performance payments have been made to NSL to date. there is a difference of opinion in terms of how they report their KPI performance to the way monitoring teams see it. And hence the reason that no performance payment has been paid to them. There is a meeting happening tomorrow, which the intention of that is to clarify the position exactly in terms of what the performance will be reported as for future. But no performance, additional payments have been made to NSL.
And penalties?
No penalties have been imposed either because of the difference of opinion between the monitoring team's position and the NSL position on that. But that, as I say, will be clarified at tomorrow's meeting.
When this has been clarified, can you let us know?
So,
And I hope, you know, I hope we would be in a position to have the council's view.
I'm sure Mr. Brown is very robust.
I can confirm that we have prepared for the meeting tomorrow, and we have all the evidence to put on the table to show them why they failed, so that they are enlightened.
There was some question about the bus lanes.
Sorry, Chairman, so yes, the councillor is quite right, it does talk about, as we would expect, NSL to respond to activity, and actually any activity, CCT or otherwise, around compliance, so that we can track actually how their performance and therefore the contract is delivering and fulfilling its criteria. And actually, as I said at the very beginning, this isn't about ensuring traffic flow and safe movement. It isn't around income issuing PCNs. That's our aim. So eventually, hopefully, we shouldn't have to issue any PCNs if compliance increases. I think again that the issue around the bus lane camera is to enable this contract to perform over its 5 years duration. So if there was an issue where either more bus lanes were introduced or bus lanes were removed, then we have the ability to manage that within the contract.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a clear indication there that, you know, it has to be raised if...
We've only got a few minutes.
Can I just ask Ms Bishop about the KPI 11, the service provider will maintain the weekly collection rate in line with budget expectations? Or Mr Brown?
It's around ensuring that tickets that they've issued are pursued and that they deliver the performance, and those tickets are issued correctly and they're valid. It isn't again about having targets around tickets and penalties.
I mean, I know there are other KPIs that cover the accuracy and appeals. That one clearly does talk about.
Councillor Snyderman, we have had a long discussion on this, more times been devoted to this than anything else, I suspect.
As usual.
So,
Councillor, the issues raised here.
well, we've raised a number of issues, we've had answers, I think we can note the answers that we've had, and thank you very much for coming, and can we thank the Cabinet member for coming, and we now have to go on to talk about the future work programme.